Okie dokie, I think our audience are all met. So I'll hand over to you, Chris, to kick things off. Thank you.
Oh, lovely. Thanks, Nikolai. Well, just on behalf of everyone at Curve, I just want to say a very, very warm welcome to all of you, wherever you are, to this rather special question and answer session around our production of Sunset Boulevard. My name's Chris Stafford and I'm Curve's Chief Executive. And as many of you will be aware, we've been in continued lockdown, but also Curve has not been able to open. And we very much planned that we would reopen our theatre in time for the festive season with Sunset Boulevard. Sadly, tears and lockdowns meant that really wasn't meant to be. However, I'm incredibly proud and thrilled that that did not knock our incredible Sunset Boulevard company, who came out en force, en masse to Leicester to film a special production of Sunset Boulevard that audiences around the world have been able to enjoy from the comfort of their own home. And we're incredibly proud of it. I'm so delighted that tonight we have the most stellar panel. We have the music and lyrics team of Andrew Lloyd Webber, Don Black and Christopher Hampton. And joining them, we have cast members Ria Jones, who plays Norma Desmond, Molly Lynch, who plays Betty Schaefer, Danny Mack, who plays Joe Gillis, and Adam Pearce, who plays Max von Mayerling. And leading and steering tonight's proceedings is the show's director, my running mate, and Curve's artistic director, Nikolai Foster. Before I hand over to Nikolai, there are just a few thanks I want to make. Firstly, to all of you, our audiences, for joining us this evening, but all the support we've received since we closed last March. It really has meant everything to us at Curve. I'd also like to thank the team at Really Useful Group and Paramount, who have made this all possible. Also, a huge thanks to our Sunset Boulevard company. They were undeterred in making this happen. And over 10 days, I believe they really have made magic for all those people out there in the dark. And finally, on behalf of Curve, but also on behalf of our sector, I'd like to say a huge thank you to everything that Andrew and his team has been doing throughout the pandemic to lobby and champion for theatre in this country. Now on to Sunset Boulevard, and I'll hand over to Nikolai. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris, and amazing to see our panel. And I know all of you wonderful folk out there in the dark are very excited as much as we are to be here this evening. So what we're going to do is I'm going to kick off with a few questions for each of our panelists just to get the ball rolling. So we'll hear from everybody individually before we then launch into your questions. Fiona, who is joining us this evening, is moderating the Q&A. If you have any questions, please start typing now, put them in the Q&A box. And as we've rolled through our sort of pre-prepared questions, we'll then launch into your questions and look forward to hearing from you. So Fiona's telling me that the Q&A button is in the bottom right hand of your screen. So please use that and just keep the questions coming. And we'll try and get through as many of them during the course of the evening. We'll be here till about 7 o'clock. So, and then I know many of you are going off to watch the stream. So I'm going to kick us off first, and a question for Andrew. Throughout your astonishing career, you've injected music into the souls of some incredible trailblazing characters, from real life icons such as Eva Peron and Jesus Christ, through to fantastic fictional creations, including Grisabella, the Phantom, and of course, Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard. So the first question, Andrew, is what attracted you to Sunset in the first place, and specifically around the character of Norma Desmond?
Well, I first heard of Sunset by Hal Prince, who suggested that it would be an interesting subject for me to look at. And he was at that time going to, I think, direct it was his plan with Hugh Wheeler, who wrote the scripts for many of Stephen Sondheim's shows. And I met with Hal and talked about it. And this comes to the point that I think you're asking me. He had this idea of updating Sunset to being really about Doris Day. And I had seen the movie before, and I got what he was talking about isolation and this, that, and the other, but it struck me that the character of Norma could never really work in that kind of way, that there was something rather different, that the whole thing about Norma was this very, very beautiful and actually not, I mean, not by today's standards old, she was only in her 50s, feeling washed up and living in this very strange world. That struck me, as a sort of lover of the Gothic, as it were, something really, really very, very interesting. Hal dropped out of the whole thing, and it was many, many years later that, several years later, that I happened to be having lunch with Chris Hampton. And I mentioned Sunset Boulevard, and I think Chris mentioned that he was approached to do a version of it for English National Opera. And so we discussed the possibility of doing something together, and that's how this collaboration happened. But I guess what really attracted me was the idea of a character as isolated as that. And I felt that it could unlock a kind of stream of music in me that perhaps I hadn't gone in that direction before. I mean, it is really about a yearning for something that has disappeared. And that really appealed to me.
Great, thank you. And I guess the idea of isolation, I mean, suddenly it takes on a whole new sort of zeitgeist and sort of prescience at this moment in time.
Yes, indeed. But that was not what we were thinking of at the time.
Thank you, Andrew. Don, you've collaborated with Andrew on more musicals than any other composer in your astonishing career, providing lyrics for shows including Aspects of Love, Tell Me on a Sunday, Bombay Dreams and Stephen Ward, in addition, of course, to Sunset Boulevard. What do you enjoy most about your collaborations with Andrew? And can you tell us a little bit about how that relationship sort of works when you're setting lyrics to the music?
The thing I like the best is getting his phone call. Because when Andrew is excited about something, it's like no other person. He's really besotted. And he was so passionate about this. But I've always loved the film Sunset Boulevard, because when I was growing up, I used to live my life at the pictures, and I saw a lot of film noir movies, like The Big Sleep, Bogart movies, James Cagney movies. But the thing I particularly loved about Sunset Boulevard from day one was the fact that it has a universal theme. The fact that I know so many people who, as Andrew said, the yearning to come back, that applies to everyone in our business. And, delusions keep them going. And that's what I thought, this is something to really sing about. And in fact, there's so many things to sing about in that, Joe Gillis, the character. And it was a joy. I have to say that when I heard Andrew's music for this, it was so different to anything he's ever done. It was amazing. It was amazing. I don't want to flatter him too much, but I never thought he wrote it when he played it to me. It was so different to anything he's ever done. And working with Christopher as well was a joy.
Thank you, Don. And a nice link over to Christopher there. What strikes me is that as an Oscar-winning film screenwriter or Tony Award-winning playwright, you're very much charged with crafting your own singular vision for a play or for a film. And of course, we all know working on a musical requires huge collaboration and compromise. What did you enjoy most about working on a Mammoth musical like Sunset Boulevard?
Well, the best fun about it was that I was a beginner. I'd never done it before, and so when you do something for the first time, it's always particularly sparks you, I think. And this was one of those. As you know, in our business, some things go well and some things don't go so well. And this was really a dream collaboration as far as I can, in my memory. I think we had a very, very good time doing it. And I think we were happy with the result. I mean, also, it was this extraordinary coincidence, the lunch Andrew mentioned, because I had been asked by the English National Opera to think of a subject for an opera, and I'd thought of Sunset Boulevard, and they had approached Paramount, and Paramount, not surprisingly, were more excited about the fact they were also negotiating with Andrew, which probably seemed to them a better prospect than the English National Opera. And so everything sort of came together in a very, as if it was fated, you know. And of course, it's always great to work on a masterpiece, which this is. The story is a masterpiece. The thing about a masterpiece is that it's always, every time you look at it, it's relevant in a different way. And I mean, I couldn't help thinking, watching you all at Leicester, about what's going on in the White House at the moment. I couldn't help thinking about particular delusions of someone who believes that the public is, you know, can't let him go and is wanting him to stay. And every time I see the show, it sparks off different responses, because there's so much in it, and it's so achieved.
Thank you. And just thinking about that sort of original process of getting the show on, has it changed massively from that original production? Has it, do you know, with each new production, do you continue to sort of rewrite bits or look at it afresh, or is it pretty much how it was in that sort of first outing? Andrew, do you want to?
Not now, I suppose. We obviously wouldn't change anything now, although I did have a rather a good time when I was looking at the larger orchestrations, when, by all ironies, we did perform Sunset Boulevard at the English National Opera, or rather we did it in the Coliseum with Glenn Close. But that, of course, brings us to really where Sunset is now, because when we did it in London for various reasons, I don't think we got it quite right. As often is the case, we had a chance to do it again in Los Angeles virtually immediately, and in really every area, including the actual physical production and how that looked. And in terms of the writing, we changed possibly what I would say is a crucial 10%. I mean, one of the things we did discover was that with my shows, I think people do like them more through sung than not. And so we did make several of the scenes more sung when we took some of the dialogue and turned those into lyrics. And that, in the version that was in LA is the version that is now performed everywhere, and that was the one that went to New York. And I must say, I don't think one could improve on that. I think were there ever to be a film of Sunset, which is something that, again, we're sort of trying to persuade Paramount should happen, there are some things I think I would consider now. But I don't know this is really the right forum to go into what they are. But there are some things that as times do change, you do discover things about what actually went on in Los Angeles at the time that one might want to include that maybe Billy Wilder felt he couldn't. Like, for example, one of the places that the young did tend to hang out was a bar called the Dunbar, the Dunbar Hotel, which was very much the place where people of colour went to, and then it was where Duke Ellington, used to go, and many of theirs. And so the younger performers would have gone to a place like that, and that interests me as a possible thing we could do for New Year. But other than that, I think one has to say it's a piece of its. We wrote it in the 1990s, and I think what we did in LA is the definitive version.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you so much to everybody. Keep your questions coming in thick and fast, and we'll come over to those in a second. Just before that, next question I've got is for Chris, Curve's very own Chris Stafford. So, Chris, out of everything we've done at Curve, what most inspired you about returning to this secretive and rich boulevard once again? What was it about Sunset that you were most excited about?
I think it was a no-brainer for us. You know, as I said, we've been closed for so long, and we wanted to make sure when we open our theatre, we open it with the statement of intent to say to audiences, the Curve they know and love is back. And actually, Sunset for us was a real game changer. Back in 2017, the theatre was still on this incredible journey, but we had, you know, over 100,000 people came to see that production, and I think it repositioned Curve in a very, very different way. But I think I almost feel that we weren't quite finished with it, and I know that when we got the What's on Stage awards, it was like, you know, there was such joy that the audiences had recognised what our show was doing, that it felt unfinished. And I think that something that which would say to audiences, Curve you know and love is back with this incredible piece of musical theatre. Sunset seemed to be the one, and I'd say we're probably, hopefully, I don't think we still are finished with it, but it's something that we're so incredibly proud of. And as I said, it really was a real game changer, I think, for us.
Thank you, Chris. Moving on to our incredible actors. First question, of course, for Ria Jones. So Ria, you were the first artist ever to tackle this role, playing Norma first in 1991 at Andrew Sydmonton Festival, where the piece premiered in a workshop presentation. Your performance, as we all know, and those watching the stream later on this evening will see, is electrifying, and it feels as if you know every aspect of this woman. What is it like returning to Norma, you know, all these different points in your career? Because as Andrew alluded to, you were involved in the Coliseum production before you came to join the Curve production in 2017. And do you discover new facets of her character each time you revisit her?
Absolutely. And I think more so this time, because it's been 2.5 years since I sang her before. And with all that's happening at the moment, it was so poignant. And there are so many layers to her. And I keep finding layers. And I keep every performance is different. My favorite scene is the final scene, because I think as an actress, you work your way up to that final scene. So when you get to that final scene, there's so much to let out as an actress. And this past year, I think it just all came out. And of course, with the beauty of the screen and the camera, it's so up close. You get to see, you know, I mean, on tour, I bawled my eyes out every night at that scene. You know, it was so, I just love playing that final scene. But with the camera so close, it really picks up everything. Whereas in the stalls, you know, in the theatre, three rows back, it wouldn't necessarily get that, you know, the emotion. But going back to Sydmonton, funnily enough, I was going through some boxes the other day, as we've all been doing during the last year, and I found from Andrew an original letter that he wrote me thanking me for bringing Norma Desmond to life on old typeface on the old typewriter. You remember those? And it was so lovely, and with the date and everything. So for me to revisit her 26 years later at the Coliseum, and then play her in my own right on the tour, and then in the stream, it's just an honor, a real honor. And I think sometimes, you know, I've spent 38 years doing what I do, and for me, it was the stars aligned at the Coliseum. It was the right place, the right time, the right musical for me and my voice. And yeah, I just thank my lucky stars that this role came along and I was lucky enough to play her. An honor.
Thank you, Ria. And just checking in the questions box, I'll just sort of jump into a couple of the questions from our audience, just because it links on so beautifully from your answer there. Lynn Fox is asking Ria, how difficult or challenging was it playing just to the cameras with no audience?
I've not done a lot of camera work, so for me, I was quite scared. You know, it's quite a pressure because we only had, as you know, one go. The stream that you'll see tonight is one take virtually. It's just one show. There was no going back and redoing any scenes. We only paused a few times to get from the dress circle down on stage, and then we picked up again. So it's one take really, which is quite incredible, I think. But to have especially I remember the Salome section, when I'm playing to Joe, and the camera is literally, and you almost want to push the camera away to talk to Joe, and you've just got to forget it's there. And I'm always up for a challenge, and I did love the challenge, but a fantastic opportunity, because we did think at one point we weren't going to be able to do it. So when Nikolai said, "What do you think about us filming it?" It was like, oh, I wished I'd had more notice. With the COVID pounds, I wished I'd had more notice. HD is not very kind. But no, it was, I just an absolute joy.
Thank you, Ria, and thank you for that question, Lynn. We'll come back to the Q&As from audience members. Another question from me, this time for Danny Mack. Good evening, Danny. I think what's so thrilling about seeing your performance up close on camera is your commitment to Joe as the perfect anti-hero. We see the guts of his character, ambition, greed, and the conflict between selling his artistic freedom for financial gain, the money and the lifestyle that Norma Desmond offers him. Do you feel you've changed your attitude towards Joe since you originally played him in 2017?
Yeah, I think so. I've always had such a connection with Joe, but it seems that the older I've got, the more mature I've got, the more I connect with him. It's a funny one. I just feel like for me, he was the perfect character. He's so well written originally anyway, but everything that he possesses is what bothers us as individuals. His frustrations towards the things he can't have, the things he wants that he can't get. These are things you can relate to in any industry, in any walk of life. But the difference with Joe is it's in an industry that we're also in, that I'm also in. So the connection there was instant. But every letdown, every knockback you get, every time you're frustrated at life, at the career, at what you're going through, you can take that and just fill Joe Gillis up with that. And that never stops happening in life. You always look for the good things, but the hard things are always the things that kind of tend to hit you the hardest and affect you the most. So taking those on board constantly, 3 more years of those, you just collect up and you just fill this man with those frustrations. When I first picked up the script, it wasn't long since I'd spent a lot of time in LA, and I just couldn't believe the parallels of how it doesn't seem any different. I'd spent, I think, 6 to 8 months in LA over 2 separate years. And the first year, it was exciting and it was fresh. And I was going into meetings with these big people I never would have thought I'd ever meet. And I had these opportunities. And I'd just come off of a show over here and over in the States. They just love that. And you've got this profile back in the UK and you're getting seen by everyone and you're getting recalled and you're meeting producers. And then nothing comes of it after months of it. And you come home. And that was fine because I'd had a great time and I felt so lucky. But I thought, I'm going to go back out. And I went out a second year. And I think I was out there for 5 months and I was out there for 3 months. And I think I'd had, say, 6 meetings in 5 weeks, or maybe it was 5 in 6. And it was so different. And it had been a year since the hype of the previous time. And I hadn't worked very much. And you just see the industry change drastically. And that was just in the small time I'd had and very early on in my career. Yet you've got Joe Gillis, who's much, much further into it. We meet him when he's about to give it all up because he's had enough. So I just had to crank that up so much. And you just find this frustration and disgust at everyone, the smiley faces, the people that tell you you're a star and they're going to call you back and they don't. And it's great for your character, for your real character as a human being, to get your priorities in order and gain some perspective. But it's hard as an actor. And to take that into Joe was a dream. It's the role I think I will compare every other role I ever read or play to.
Wow. Thank you, Danny. Molly, next question for you. So you succeed beautifully in presenting Betty as a 21st century woman, and she truly represents those trailblazing women of early Hollywood who battered their way through the patriarchy and had to work twice as hard as their male contemporaries. What has it been like for you playing this fantastic early feminist? I know earlier Andrew alluded to this sort of underbelly and side of LA that maybe we don't see so much in the show, but certainly Betty feels like she is a sort of route into that, and probably would have been seen at the Dunbar Hotel, it feels to me.
Yeah, she's really, really, I think she's, you know, such a modern contemporary character, and I always imagine her as very progressive, and she's incredibly intelligent. I think there was so few women at that time trying to achieve what she was trying to achieve and be screenwriters. I know there was Joan Harrison, who was like Alfred Hitchcock's secretary, who like climbed the ranks, and I read a lot about her and how she had to, you know, works, you know, triple like the amount to just get up that far. And I love about Betty as well that she's not particularly virtuous, or she's not the goody two shoes of the story. You know, she is also deeply flawed, and you don't just root for her like she's a heroine. She's complicated and she makes mistakes, and she's a bit ruthless. You know, she's got that showbiz kind of, you know, like just fight it out, fight your way to the top, and it doesn't matter who you knock along the way. So you can kind of get that bite from her that just makes her, I think, gives her a bit more of an edge and makes her really, really interesting for me to play. So I was super lucky. I love her.
Excellent. Thank you, Molly. And just before we open up totally to the audience, one final question from me for Mr. Pearce, Adam. So can you tell us a little bit about your approach to Max and his role in Norma's life? Through your extraordinarily nuanced performance, it is clear that Max has so much backstory and history, but is really happy to remain in Norma's shadow. We'd love to hear a bit more about your sort of way into Max and your sort of take on him, please.
Absolutely. I mean, Max in this, he doesn't say too much, and he observes and watches and making sure his loved one is okay. And when he needs to roar and warn, he roars, you know. And I think for me, the key was stillness and not having to do too much, but letting the words that I did say and sing mean everything. And I don't have to fling my arms everywhere and describe everything with my twinklies, you know. And especially at this time now, I think from 2017 to now, and making you realize how important loved ones are and how you want to protect them and take care of them, enlightened that even more. And I mean, he's got such a, it's so wonderful to just observe. And it sounds silly, but as you know, as an actor, we get told to listen, and that's exactly what Max does. And it's amazing what a journey you can have when you just listen, and how it affects you when you need to roar and when you need to be delicate. And yeah, that's I think that was so important to Max, that he doesn't have to do the looking over a corner, making sure everything's okay. He's just there, part of the furniture, but he's wonderful, and he just listens and observes and protects like a lion.
Thank you, Adam. And I think what's been I think really interesting from a sort of directorial point of view, doing a show like this is that you have a sort of first night audience every day, don't we, on Twitter and on our social media channels. We're all, you know, people will be watching the show at 7:30 tonight and they'll respond, and we'll have all of these sort of different thoughts coming at us. And I think it's been really interesting reading comments about Max and some of the bloggers and the reviews, because they really are quite disparate. You know, some people see him as quite a dark character and he's got quite a sinister past, and what are his motivations? And then others see him very much as a sort of, as you say, the lion who cares and is very much looking out for his muse and this great talent. And it's
absolutely, and he is a mysterious character. He is so mysterious. But I think for me, I wanted to bring some heart to his mysteriousness. And I think that's, yeah, I think that's so important.
Ditto. Right. So I'll stop asking my questions now. I can see they're coming in thick and fast from our audience. So first question is for our writing team. It's from Jason Lagrange, and Jason asks, how did you feel when you sat and watched the opening night? How did you feel? So Andrew, if you want to kick us off, please.
Well, it's always the same with opening nights. You know, you just, in a way, I don't like them. You know, you're always hoping that things will go absolutely right. In London, I recall that it actually played rather slowly, and I was really quite concerned about it when it didn't seem to quite pick up in London in the way that one once hoped it would. How on the other hand, in Los Angeles, I remember the opening night to be absolute magic. Everything came together. Maybe it was something that because it was in Los Angeles, maybe it was because of that, that there seemed to be something about it in that context that was just extraordinary, really. But on the whole, I mean, I think like most composers, I spend my time on opening nights wishing I was somewhere else, waiting to come back and see you later.
Thank you, Andrew. And what about you, Christopher? Do you wish you're somewhere else, or are you? What's your sort of feel on opening nights?
I make myself go to opening nights because I think it's not fair to. I mean, I know some writers who slope off and don't attend opening nights, but I reckon if you're putting the audience through it, you might as well put yourself through it too. And actually, in the case of Sunset Boulevard, it was one of the pleasanter experiences I've had on a first night, just for the reasons I mentioned before, because it was the first time I'd worked on a musical. It was all different in flavor and quality, and I just enjoyed myself. But as Andrew said, the first night in Los Angeles was a sort of astonishing, and not to mention that, you know, people like Ronald Reagan and so on in the auditorium, but it was and Billy Wilder, of course, even more important. Yeah, I found it more enjoyable than most.
Thank you.
It was quite a night, that, because Ronald Reagan at the interval, because I was sort of detailed to look after him, Ronald Reagan got up and said, well, that was a great movie. And we had to try and keep him from leaving the theatre. There was some goodies there. Billy Wilder, do you remember Billy Wilder when he said, Mr. Weber, I can't do his accent, he said, you've done a good job with my piece and your writers. He said, but the problem with theatre is it's always in long shot. And so, oh goodness, but it was quite a night, that.
Wow, it sounds incredible. And Don, I know you've got some memories of meeting Billy Wilder when you were sort of putting the piece together. Can you share a few of those with us, please?
Well, he was a genius, an overused word, but Billy Wilder was a genius. But I remember the opening night in Los Angeles, and Billy Wilder came up to Christopher and me and said, in a Viennese accent, he said, "You boys were very clever. You didn't change anything," which I thought was wonderful, because you know, Christopher always says, his first beginning, he said, it's so good, we got to treat it very delicately, like a Fabergé egg or something. So we didn't change much because it was terrific to start with. But an opening night, when it is in LA, a glittering occasion, I mean, it is exciting. And it stays with you forever. Of course, I've had some bad ones in New York with the Butcher of Broadway when you're waiting up for the reviews. But that wasn't like that in LA, thank God.
Wow.
That sad footnote is that the Schubert Theatre, where it took place, is now a large office building. It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, it's a shopping mall as well. They're torn down for that. And now there's no really great theatre in LA, and well, certainly not in the main part of the town.
Yes.
It's very sad.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you, Jason, for that question. I think this question from Millie Davies for Chris Stafford, possibly. What was the biggest challenge with creating a production in lockdown? How did the lockdown affect the process?
I think the biggest challenge is the constant changing of goalposts. We genuinely wouldn't know as everyone, from one day to the next, what we can do and what we can't do. But not notwithstanding, it's about the fact that, we're in a pandemic and how do you make a show? And I think what Nikolai did rather beautifully and brilliantly is that the show is fully socially distanced on stage. The speed in which we had to get the show up and running, we couldn't quarantine everyone. We couldn't have everyone locked away for 2 weeks. So but all of those are challenges. And it is the one of, genuinely, I think we spoke about our highlights. And my highlight of Sunset Boulevard was knowing everyone was COVID negative on day one of rehearsals. So we knew we were able to go ahead and press go, because until that point, you've got to show your press and go on. You've got money that you've got to pay out and you've paid out. And if someone's positive, it potentially all has to be cancelled. So it's that changing of goalposts and everything, which was a huge challenge. But I'm delighted to say we overcame it and we have Sunset Boulevard at home.
Yeah, it's the weirdest, one of the weirdest processes that I've been through, where at the beginning of like the sort of main sort of tech filming week, there was genuinely a fear sort of gnawing at the back of my mind that we may not get to the end of that week, that we may be sort of shut down before we actually get to Saturday to film the piece. And it was such an odd thing, because suddenly this week, which would normally fly by in a flash, it just felt like sort of this eternity of, sort of waiting. But of course, we managed to get through it. Question from Sarah Taylor to Ria. What song means the most to you that you sing in the show?
Wow, good question. They all mean something to me, but I think this particular time, it has to be As If We Never Said Goodbye, for the very reason that it was back at the Curve where the tour started, and the lyrics just sum up, everything we're experiencing, especially within the theatre industry at the moment. And to be back on stage, but it was so surreal, back on stage and yet performing to an empty auditorium, but on film. So it was like a silent movie all over again for her, which really helped as well in that moment. Again, I love With One Look, because again, that's just a wonderful song for me as a singer to sing. It's a fantastic song and the lyrics are wonderful, and it's straight in there. As soon as she's on stage, within a couple of minutes, she's straight into that first big number. There's no getting away from who she is, why she's there. So for different reasons, both those. But I think if I had to choose one, it's As If We Never Said Goodbye, definitely.
Brilliant, fabulous. I'm doing my best. I'm moving through all the screens and all the questions. And I've got Fiona coaching me as we go. So I'm sort of practicing for my DJ days. So Sarah asked out of the writers as well. So Christopher, would you like to share is there a favourite moment, a favourite sort of lyric, a favourite sort of memory you have from the piece?
Well, I like the title song very much. I think Danny performs it wonderfully, and it's very good to see it on screen and performed in that particular way. but I mean, I just picked that out at random because I remember enjoying writing the song with Don. It was just a day that went very well, and so that's a kind of pleasant memory, one of the many pleasant memories associated with. I mean, I must say before I go off that I have to really congratulate you. It's a very originally conceived piece as you've done it, and it does throw light into all sorts of corners that I guess a conventional stage production might not do. But so hats off.
Thank you, Christopher. And it's a real, I mean, it's always a team effort, isn't it? We spoke earlier about musicals being the sort of most collaborative and most challenging of all the art forms. And that's the great thing about Curve and our theatre in Leicester, that as well as attracting incredible writers such as yourselves and these incredible actors who are representing a whole ensemble of actors and, you know, artists who've played at the theatre over the years, we've got this incredible tech team. Just before we went into lockdown in March last year, we just opened Andrew's production of Phantom of the Opera, and seeing our tech team who, you know, 5 years ago may have been a little bit sort of green around that sort of level, that scale of production, all of that automation, but seeing them absolutely working cheek by jowl with the touring you know, crew and technicians who were putting that together was really humbling and sort of mind-blowing, really. And that's why we were able to put this Sunset together so quickly. I mean, it really was, we were sort of lighting it and, you know, working out the automation when we realized we'd have to postpone The Colour Purple. And during that week, it sort of became clear that actually we're going to have to switch it all over to film. And certainly as a director, when you know you've got that amazing crew and all of the freelance creatives, Ben Cracknell on lighting, Tom Marshall on sound, Colin Richmond and Douglas O'Connell, who did this set design, costume and digital sort of overlay respectively, when you know you've got that behind you, you've got nothing to lose. You know you can be really bold and imaginative and not suddenly think, oh my God, we were going to do this with a socially distanced audience. Now suddenly we have to film it all. This is somehow second best. You can immediately go, we've got the freedom to think outside the box and really think about how this piece might sort of transmit and translate onto screen in this way. So thank you. And it's, you know, it's a massive team effort, as you know, and so many good things come out of challenges. You know, when we were doing it with an audience, because of the social distancing, the 16-piece orchestra had to be in rehearsal room 1 because it was, you know, our huge pit wasn't big enough to have them all, you know, with social distancing. So again, by doing it on film, suddenly we can take out all the seats in the stalls, and then the musicians, and it always seems mad to me that, you know, you're doing a musical and the most important element of that surely is the music. And, you know, the musicians are always hidden away in the pit. So to have them in the stalls, to have them in that arena with us was really, really exciting and, you know, sort of added to the energy and the dynamism. And as Ria said, you know, we only stopped a couple of times, you know, for people to get down from 5 floors, or, you know, Danny and Molly sort of crawling out of the seating bank, or Ria coming down from the circle. We were really committed to the idea of it being a live performance and that we didn't stop. We just sort of kept ploughing on. And I think, you know, some of the wobbles on the camera, or, you know, the occasional sort of thing that doesn't feel completely neat or perfect, that's part of its charm, really. Don, did you have a sort of favourite moment or song or...
I do, but you've been talking a bit about collaboration, and it reminds me of a line that Billy Wilder said to me about collaboration when we were having lunch with him. He said, always work with someone you respect who thinks differently to you. I thought that was great. I thought that was great advice. My favorite song in it is The Moment. And I have to agree with Ria, As If We Never Said Goodbye, because I also think it's one of the great moments in any musical. It's just an incredible moment that, you know, she's adrift, unhinged. The audience know everything, but she thinks it's heartbreaking. From the minute she says, "I don't know why I'm frightened," the goosebumps start. And it's a magical melody. And we had a good time doing it, Chris, didn't we?
Thank you, Don. And Andrew, is there a sort of, it seems bizarre asking the composer if there's a sort of favourite song or moment in the show, but when you think of the show, what sort of is the moment that you sort of go to with joy and a sense of sort of optimism?
Well, there's so much in the show that I really, really do like. I'm very fond of Let's Have Lunch, you know, because I love all the fact that it does crazy time signatures everywhere. I love that. I love the fact that Sunset Boulevard's in 5/8 time, and I'm pretty certain that there's no other title song from a musical that's in 5/8 time, so I like that. But of course, I mean, as a composer, I remember when I first saw the movie thinking that it might be possible to do it as a musical. You could not respond to the scene where she goes back to Paramount again and Hog Eye turns the lights on her. I mean, that's a gift for any composer. So of course, that in a way is a moment that I think we all agree is pretty extraordinary, but it does come back to Billy Wilder, doesn't it? Because that's a moment that he created that I think found a chord in all three of us. And as I say, it's a gift, that sort of moment, a gift. Nikolai, can I ask you a question?
Yes, of course.
When did you come up with the really brilliant idea of using the auditorium in the way you did?
Well, it was again born out of the sort of chaos when we realized that we weren't going to be able to play to an audience. Obviously, when we were going to have the audience in the round and sort of looking into the performance space on four sides, when you realized that all of those seats were going to be empty, it was in that week when we were sort of lighting it, and I'm looking up at the fly tower, and it sort of looks like a sound stage. It looks like a sort of modern day sound stage. And then when you look into the, you know, the auditorium curve is quite contemporary. So again, it felt like that was an extension of that world, film, the soundstage being the sort of beating heart of the piece, and Norma Desmond. And like you say, Billy Wilder created this moment, and we've all in different ways really responded to that moment. And then I thought, well, you know, there are so many moments in the production we did in 2017 when, you know, Joe's getting into a car and then he goes on a car chase. Well, how do you do that in a little space in the middle? You know, why not use the whole space so that if somebody's making an entrance down a staircase in a mansion and she's isolated, why doesn't Norma come from the back of the circle down that huge staircase? And then, you know, it's not only social distancing, but you've also got somebody isolated, surrounded by these empty seats. And so it sort of grew from there, really. I just sort of had that first image of Ria in the balcony, isolated, huge staircase. And then it just seemed to work in a really filmic way that, you know, again, one of my favorite moments is the title song at the beginning of Act 2, and the idea of sort of, you know, Joe Gillis is in the middle of the sort of studio, sort of, you know, drenched in sort of light, and then he walks all the way from the studio in a single sort of steady cam shot to the back of the other side of the theatre. And there's just something really sexy about that, and something that really feels right for the piece. And of course, it all comes from the piece. It's always the source material. As a director, you're led by the material, and it just felt Sunset feels so sexy and contemporary and alive, and it can really take this. And then, of course, you know, you think about the space above the, you know, the garret above the mansion. Well, then the fly tower, and we were during the tech, and Danny suggested, why don't we go under the seating bank? That feels like a sort of hovel for an office, and then we can walk out into the Paramount lot. So it all just grew organically, really. And the more we did it, the more brave I think we became, really.
Well, I thought it was one of the most extraordinary uses of space that I've ever seen. And I really, really thought that I mean, it was original. And as you say, it's obviously that it did come organically. But I completely see it now you say it. But I must say, I don't think very many directors would have thought of it. So congratulations.
Well, thank you, Andrew. That means the world. Thank you so much. And a question here from one of our Curve youth and community members, Matt Hilton. This is a question for Danny. Matt is asking Danny, as a young actor myself, what would you recommend to do to land a fantastic role like Joe Gillis?
Oh, it's really hard advice to give that, because it's like winning the lottery, genuinely. I'm at a loss for words, because I think you need to be sure about who you are. I think being an actor is the more, I mean, none of us have figured it out. You know, we're all still hustling. We'll be hustling till the day we die. But the older I get, the more I think it's about, obviously you're working hard, you're doing your training to put yourself in the right places. But most of all, it's being confident with what you're selling and not trying to be something that somebody else wants, or something that you think somebody else wants. And I think you can take that into your own life as normal, or you could definitely take it as an actor. I think when you get a script and you try and think about what the other person at the other side of the desk wants to receive, you're only ever trying to give them something that you can't. If you try and take a script, take a role, and put yourself in those shoes and then deliver that at 100%, then it's up to the other side of the desk to decide whether that's the version of that character that they want. But as long as you're 100% sure that that's what you want to do with it and that's the way you want to go, and you give your insight to that, that's the only thing you can be certain about. The rest is to what they want to receive and how that fits into the jigsaw. So I think it's take on the role, take on the script, and make that script fit you. Don't make yourself fit what you think somebody else wants.
Yeah, thank you, Danny. And I think just to support what Danny said, Matt, certainly from a director's point of view, you know, seeing an actor being creative and feeling like they own the material, even if their choices might not be aligned with your vision of the part, it's always best to be yourself, make original choices, and make choices which feel right for you, rather than trying to sort of second guess what anybody else might be after. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Danny. Question for Karen Stevens. Molly, perhaps you can give us some insight into this. So did you feel that performing without an audience affected your portrayal at all? And how did you feel personally at the curtain call when there wasn't a full house applauding? Great question from Karen there. Thanks, Molly.
I think it felt really poignant and in some ways like kind of tragically beautiful, like that we were all there together in this quiet space. I remember us standing there and waving at this camera, and it was kind of a miracle that we were there in the first place. So I definitely wasn't sad. I didn't have that kind of, it wasn't like there was something majorly missing, but it was definitely something tragic but kind of beautiful about it. And yeah, I don't think it affected. I think we were very lucky because we had done this show with an audience. So we had that experience kind of in our bodies already. So it'd be interesting to see how it would be to do it straight from scripts to what we did. But we were all very lucky that we had that energy that we had on the tour in us already. But yeah, I think it feels like a little time capsule that we'll look back on and go, oh my God, look at that odd circumstance, but it's so beautiful and special. So I just felt very, very lucky.
Thank you, Molly. Adam, did you have any thoughts about performing without an audience? Of course, you've just been at the Dominion performing to nearly 2,000 people every night in the Prince of Egypt. How was it feeling sort of your next experience of performing, being literally to an empty space and no audience? How did that feel for you?
Yeah, I think because it was so bizarre, because of course, starting in 2017 with when we were there originally, we were in the one space, and then to return, and it seemed like a completely different space. So that was quite bizarre in itself. And then to have the orchestra in front of you, which was wonderful. yeah, it was great. I mean, like filming wise, all I've really done is a cough and a spit on something, you know. So this was a brand new experience for me as well. But I think like at the end with the curtain call, and we just finished and then had like our speeches, and then I remember like looking at Danny, looking at Molly, and just kind of like, because we couldn't, like our eyes were welling up, because it was complete sadness that it was over. But then I think on the drive home that night, the tears kind of turned into lucky tears on how lucky we were to experience this 10 days of pure magic with our tribe that we'd been missing for so long. And we became great friends in 2017 anyway. So then this was like our what a Christmas present. You know, it really was something quite wonderful. And I know I keep on saying it, but thank you. I want to take this opportunity to thank you for doing it. It was just wonderful. We owe a lot to you. So thank you, Nikolai and Chris. Top class.
Thank you, Adam. You're very welcome. And I'm sure I could speak for Chris. I mean, we feel exactly the same. It was just so magical, and we felt so grateful to be able to all come together and make this piece of work together. Ilaria has asked, what were the challenges of adapting a musical into an edited and recorded version in such a short amount of time? I guess I should sort of jump in there. I mean, it really was a short amount of time. We met on the Thursday. Everybody was COVID tested. And as Chris sort of said, that was one of the sort of most stressful moments actually of coming together. Was everybody going to be sort of cleared for takeoff, as it were? We were, of course, all cleared for takeoff. But then we had 2 days of music work with our incredible musical supervisor, Stephen Brooker, who really did wonders. We had a slightly reduced cast size from the tour we'd done originally, so there was a lot of complicated harmonies to work out. And then the Saturday, we started staging together in the theatre. And then I think the Wednesday of the following week, we were working with all of the camera teams. Thursday, we did a dress rehearsal. Friday, Saturday, we recorded both shows. And then literally from Sunday morning until I think Tuesday morning at 4 a.m, I was locked in an editing suite with the amazing team from Crosscut, who are a local film company who we worked with and collaborated with to create all of this. And we literally just chopped it together. And I have to say, it is a lesson, I think, for all of us in trusting your instinct when you've done your homework, which we really had done, you know, in 2017 when we mounted the production originally. We all came free of ego. We just had to get on, trust our instincts and crack on really and do it. Because of course, aside from the artistic pressures, it was, you know, all of that external pressure of COVID and, you know, are we going to get shut down before the end of the week? So we all just got on, and actually, I can't, maybe the actors will disagree, or Chris will say, oh my God, do you not realize you were a nightmare? And actually that was the biggest challenge. You were the challenge. But actually it was very easy, I felt. It felt very sort of organic. I mean, what do you think, Ria? Were there sort of any major challenges for you?
No, I just think exactly. I think we were all so delighted to be back in the theatre, back together as a company. We had such a happy time. They're one of the best rehearsal periods ever. And I was of course I was nervous, because once it's out there on film, it's out there forever really, and you had 2 goes at it and that was it. So that was scary, but then like you said, you've got to forget that and just enjoy and live in the moment, because I didn't want to look back and say I wasted that moment in worrying about silly things. Just enjoy it and be grateful to be back on stage singing that fantastic score, playing that role with that wonderful team around me. I felt safe, and I trusted you, I trusted everyone obviously that around me, and we were there for the right reasons. We wanted to really show the best we could of this work, and I really feel we have, under all the circumstances we had up to it, during it, and since. I think it's been incredibly successful, and I'm absolutely delighted to be part of it. I really am. So thank you to everyone here.
Well, thank you, Ria. I mean, a play like this sort of rests on the shoulders of the leading actors who are driving it through, and without you and Danny and Molly and of course Adam, we you know, the production would be anything without you guys. So thank you. Anthony Clare asks, when we are all back watching shows in a live theatre, what do the panelists think audiences would most want to see? So Chris, how about from a sort of producerial point of view, what would you like to see when we sort of kick off again?
I can probably answer that with what I think audiences won't want to see. And I think that's going to be COVID response pieces. I think they can wait for many years. I think audiences want to get back to that, with that shared experience. You know, you look at a theatre like Curve, we have such a fabulous, loyal audience. And it goes back to what I was saying before, you know, for us, we know that we do a range of programming, but musicals are really at the heart of what we do, those big, really fantastic pieces of musical theatre. So I think it's about audiences wanting to go back to their theatres, and their theatres to be the theatres that they know and love. But it's not really a full response, but I can definitely say I don't think people want COVID responses.
Thank you, Chris. And Andrew, do you have any thoughts on that? Obviously, as well as being a composer, you own several West End theatres where so many things from big musicals to plays are performed. What are your sort of thoughts on the future and what audiences might want to see?
Well, I would have thought it's pretty clear that they're going to want to see shows that are uplifting and joyous. I think you might not want to go back and see something which is too depressing or at the beginning. I have a feeling that there'll be a need for a sort of celebration. I think when we go back to theatres again, I think we are going to have to think there is somewhat of a new norm. I think we're going to have to wear masks for a bit, and I think we're going to have to, I think as any theatre owner, I'm sure Chris would agree with this, that we who are responsible for the buildings must make sure that they're as safe and as COVID-free as possible. And I think there are some really quite optimistic things that we've been able to find on that in that regard. But I'm absolutely sure that what people are going to really want is something that celebrates the one thing that theatre has that is completely unique, which is that performance that you go to. That's the performance for you, isn't it? That audience is the only audience in the world who is seeing that piece at that particular time in the way that it's been performed that night. And there is something so magical about theatre that I'm absolutely certain that when we do come back, theatre is going to have a bonanza that is something that is unprecedented in our time. I really believe that.
I agree.
Yeah, I think we all absolutely support and echo those thoughts, Andrew. And I think, you know, as you say, there's nothing more magical, more mysterious, more seductive than the power of being in a theatre. And I think it's really magical and exciting going to see a show in the West End, but in a city like Leicester, you know, the ownership that our audience feel of our venue and coming into the space, and it's their theatre and they own it, and they're mates with the actors and the, you know, the creatives who come into that venue for, you know, any given show. You can't sort of beat that feeling, as you say. It's really quite extraordinary. We'll go do a couple more questions and then we will start to wrap things up. There's been quite a few questions about working sort of with COVID safety and guidelines. How was that for the actors? How did we feel? I don't know, Molly, do you want to give us any thoughts on, you know, aside from the COVID test, it was actually quite, I wouldn't say plain sailing, but actually once we'd got used to keeping the distance and, you know, all of those sort of measures we put in place, it actually felt sort of quite normal, didn't it? We sort of got into our groove quite easily, I thought.
Yeah, I totally agree. We were really used to putting on the masks as soon as we stood up from our seats, and yeah, it's actually kind of scary how normal it's become and how you automatically stop 2 meters away from a person. The time I really felt it, the only time I really felt it was, like Adam said, was on the last day when you're saying goodbye to everyone and just had this amazing, cathartic, beautiful experience, and you just want to squeeze someone and you just want to say goodbye and thank you. And we couldn't, and it felt very, very strange that yeah, not being able to hug. And you know, we're in showbiz, we like to hug. So that was the only time it really felt missing. But otherwise, I think, yeah, it was really good, and everyone was really on it. I think everyone wanted it to work so badly. We were very disciplined with ourselves.
Yeah, thank you. And Danny, how did it sort of feel for you? Because I realise in the show, Joe Gillis is busy smooching with either Norma or Betty, and has a lot of sort of physical contact. How did that affect your performance or your sort of choices in any way?
I think we were really lucky that we've done the show previously, and so you can recall those moments as an actor. You feel and sense what happens in that time, rather than having to imagine what it is for the first time and it not be there. So I think that really helped. Anyway, so we were lucky in that sense. I think, of course, it's such a shame, but we all understand. And I did wonder, and still wonder, if people don't know the show, if they try and imagine what happens there, the bit at the end of Act 1 where Jo comes back to Norma after she slit her wrists, and she, at that moment, that's where they do embrace and he kisses her, and it's such a high point of the show, which drives us into Act 2, which makes us come back to our seats. And I think it was done brilliantly, like so incredibly, considering all the circumstances. But I do wonder whether people would get that, and I wondered whether there would just be a written line underneath saying they kiss or something. but I think that would completely take away and idiotise the audience, even if that's a word. But yeah, I think we got around it brilliantly, and what was magnificent is having the cameras and coming in close. Like we said, we was chatting on the radio this morning, and you said how there was kind of madness in the realism of the room at times, but on camera you don't see that. You see what the camera gives you, and I think the way you directed that really gave the closeness. And having seen it, you don't really notice the distance between people, and when you do, it almost adds to the piece, considering where we are. And it's a moment of history now, and I think this accentuates that.
Thank you, Danny. Couple of last questions before we wrap things up. Jonathan Kerry congratulates everybody, the writers and the actors, on a stunning production, and asks, although we would of course like to be back watching live theatre in person as soon as possible, do you think you might do something like this again? So I guess, Chris, do you want to answer that for us, please?
Well, yeah, I very much hope so. You know, our doors are closed, but we're still firing on all cylinders. And I think just one of the things that was mentioned before about the filming aspect, you know, we make theatre, we don't make films. This is a massive leap and a huge risk for us. We've never done this before. And actually, we're so thrilled with the response we've had. I'm sure there will be other projects that we'll want to pursue. And I think even when we are back to what is the new normal, I'm sure there's ways in which we're going to take from Sunset and look at new ways that we might engage audiences. The joy about Sunset is seeing tweets at 9 o'clock in the morning of people in Australia about to tune in to watch a streaming. And that for us is really, really important. So I think we will. And, you know, who knows how long we're going to be in this state, but the theatre may be physically closed, but Curve is very, very much open.
Thank you. And question for Ria from Jason Lagrange. Jason is asking how it feels, Ria, to being the person who worked on the role right from the beginning and have sort of carried the baton of Norma Desmond from Sidmonton right through to today. How does that feel?
Feel old? No, it was it was a dream. Listen, it was a dream come true, because you know, there I was, 24, singing it for the first time, which was an absolute dream. Little did I think, because of course, you know, I thought you'd cast huge stars like Glenn Close and, you know, all the big stars that played Norma. So I didn't think in my career I would ever get a chance to play her in my own right. But of course I have. And so it's been a dream, and that I don't want to end, basically, ever.
That's beautiful.
When I'm 70, we'll have to change the lines. Nothing's wrong with being 70 unless you're acting 20. So I'd play it till the end.
We'll have to talk to the writers about that.
Of course, of course.
And we've got quite a few questions from, I think, some of our CYCC acting cohort, just asking advice for people entering the theatre profession. So Adam, would you just give us a blast of your wisdom and maybe a few sort of final thoughts before I just hand back over to Andrew, Don and Christopher, just about, you know, advice to your fellow younger actors?
Oh, I don't know about wisdom, goodness me. But no, I think, like what Danny said, you've got to, I think the main thing is know your castability. Like I knew when I was 21 leaving drama school that I'm a big lad. I'm not going to be your Marius. I'm not going to be your Andreas, you know, but you've just got to find your feet and know your journey. Being a character actor with a bass voice, I knew, well, my agent told me in my interview, actually, he said, look, you're going to be understudy for a good 10 years of the older parts, and then when you hit your 30s, parts are going to start coming to you, you know, and lo and behold, he's been right. He's been bang on the money. But just, yeah, like Danny said, when you find something, when you're up for something, when you think I could play that part, make it your own, and wear the shoes, analyze everything, take it to complete extremes, because you might find something quite exciting about it. But really, really do your research, do your work, and know everything.
Thank you, Adam. That is great advice, which I fully subscribe to and support. So before we wrap things up this evening, I just wondered if there are any sort of final thoughts from our writing team. It's been so incredible having you join us this evening. Don, did you have any sort of final thoughts you want to leave us with about Sunset or your experience of it?
Talk about people in the business, coming into the business. The great Moss Hart, you know, director and writer, said something which is so true. And he said, for anyone working in the theatre, disappointment is inevitable. And I agree with that. It isn't just about talent, it's about temperament. And if you can't take rejection, you're in the wrong game.
Mm. Yeah, and I think
it's not a downer. It's just that when you get disappointed, that's the game you're in.
Yeah, and I think what you say about temperament is so spot on, because again, how do you get a show like this up in little more than a week? Well, you do it because you have 150 people in a room who want to crack on, who want to collaborate, who want to work as part of a team. And yes, we can politely disagree about things, but our temperaments are so sort of aligned that we're all moving the juggernaut, the show, in the same direction. Yes. We've lost Christopher Hampton. I hope he wasn't put off by temperament. Maybe he'll rejoin us again in a moment. But Andrew, do you have any sort of final thoughts, anything you'd like to sort of leave us with this evening?
Well, I thought that Adam's advice was really spot on, because actually to know what your limitations and what your strengths are, I think as a performer that's an incredibly important thing and really good piece of advice. And I think Don is also right about temperament. But one thing I would add, just on an optimistic note, is that, you know, as a director, I know as, as a writer, there is a fantastic moment, isn't there, when we're all auditioning and we're looking for somebody and we ourselves are begging that the person who comes on stage is going to be right for the part. And you say, please, 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 come through, come through. And when they do, it's absolutely joyous. So actors must always remember that we're not looking for the bad things. We're looking and praying that they're going to be right for the role. And, you know, it's not like the old days. It's not like 42nd Street. It's a quite different process, quite different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, none of us want to be sort of sitting in those sort of murky casting, you know, rooms. We can think of some of the dives we've all been in. We all sort of want to get out of there as soon as possible, really, and be dazzled by the talent so we can, you know, have lunch. Let's have lunch. I have to say, actually,
good title, that.
It's a great title. And I have to say, Andrew, it is actually one of the hardest moments I personally, as a director, have ever worked on. That opening sequence. I mean, when we staged it originally, it really did sort of give me sleepless nights before we came to that first rehearsal. We had to sort of block it all through. And I thought sort of doing the concert version, we could just have people sort of standing there. But no, we still sort of had to then make sure the cameras were absolutely getting everybody. And the poor camera operators, you know, in the middle of a line when it has to cut to the other person who has a sort of dominant line. It was absolutely mind-boggling, but absolutely thrilling when we both nailed it musically and, you know, in terms of what we're seeing on screen there. So, Christopher, any final thoughts from you just before we wrap up? We thought we'd offended you. You sort of suddenly vanished. But
no, my battery ran out, so I had to run downstairs and plug it in. So that's what happened. Simple technological incompetence. Well, I think all I wanted to say really is that if you know, in terms of people starting out in the business, is that one of the prerequisites for having a long career is to be able to sort of treat failure and success with the same equanimity. In other words, that you're going to get both those things, and you may as well steel yourself to the fact that it's not all going to be roses, but if you take that on board, it's you know, there's nothing that can compare with working in the theatre, in my view.
Here, and that I think is a fantastic place to leave it. So thank you, Andrew, Christopher and Don, for sharing those very specific thoughts. I know, because I know the young people who are on the call tonight, it'll mean a lot to them hearing from the actors and hearing from you gentlemen, your wisdom and your generosity. There is much appreciated, both from the audience and from our Curve Youth and Community Company. So thank you so much. And a huge thank you to all of the panel this evening, to Fiona, who's marshalled us all and looked after it all, of course to Adam, and to Molly, and to Danny, and to Ria, and to Chris, and a huge thank you to our writers who, of course, we wouldn't be here without your genius and your talent. So to Don and to Christopher and to Andrew, thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing Sunset with us and allowing us to perform it, because it really has been a career highlight for all of us on the call this evening, and it means so much to our audiences, those who saw the production in 2017 and have then seen the stream, and of course to everybody watching, thank you for joining us.